I'd like to introduce our guest speakers. The first one that will be going is Jean Yo. I didn't say your name right.
It's okay. I don't even say it correctly.
Tell me how to say your name.
Just like you, like hey, you.
Jean Yu. Okay,
Yeah.
Jean Yu. Sorry about that. He has 25 years of experience in cybersecurity, including Warner Brothers and Sony. I bet there's some interesting stories with that one, and multiple companies in the Fortune 100. And he'll be speaking first about what is the dark web and what's on it. And then we'll move on to Jim Drever and Matt Smith, and they're going to be talking about some of the tools out there and some of the things that they're seeing and the crazy trends for Internet of Things security. And then finally, we'll be finishing with Marjorie Anderson, who is a grant writer extraordinaire. She has written a grant for Casper College to get a cyber lab, which is a very secure lab where students can access the dark web, and she'll be talking about that. So what I'm going to do first is hand it off to Gene and let him get started. And then Gene, if you would hand it off to Jim and Matt, that would be great. And Jim will be by video, so I can start that off. Just give me a cue. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Can everybody see the slide? I'm gonna assume yes, or somebody. Oh, perfect. Thank you, David. Thank you, Tyler. So again, I just want to add one last quick thing. I do want to say I went to the Sony after the breach, not during or before the breach. So I want everybody to be very clear about that. Again, my name is Gene Yu. I'm the CEO of Resecurity, and then we'll go over to dark web, just kind of talk about dark web and just kind of explain what it is in a simplest form. So what is a dark web? Well, by definition, and this is actually in marketing materials, you know, you go to Google website, you're going to see so many variations of it. So by definition, you're going to see that there is a dark web kind of sits between what we call the surface web and the deep web, and then in the middle is the dark web. By definition, though, anything that's surface web is stuff that you could actually use your Google or your browser to actually search for terms, and then actually comes out with the result. Whereas the dark web and the deep web are very specific in the sense that they're not really indexed, meaning that you can't Google them unless you know the specific places. In addition, both dark web and deep web requires either a specific software like Tor or some sort of a network configuration, or invited access. It is already, for me, confusing just by definition and all the marketing materials. It is I know there's a lot of confusion because we keep using the terms in a very broad way when it doesn't really make any sense to anybody. So in layman's terms, in the world that we live in today, we talk about surface web, like what we talked about, like the social media, the websites, the chat collaboration portals, and what have you. All of the stuff that you could actually see, touch, and feel. And then you got the dark web, which is what we talked about earlier, but like the Onion, the Tor software, forums, or marketplaces. But interestingly enough, deep web is the same way, that you have the Onion, the Tor, the forums, and marketplaces. So in a way, this dark web, dark web, darknet, deep web, from a professional standpoint, it is very same thing. It's the same meaning for us. I know everybody uses it like it's some kind of some magic sauce, but reality is it's everything outside of the surface web. Now, what it basically means to us in our professional world that actually works in intelligence, that for us, these are all things connected to the web or the internet. It's just, for us, it's all the same. It's just a terminology or meaning or definition that somebody just decided to put on there. And then really the main difference between the surface web and the rest is that there is requires you to have some sort of a form or software privileges. So in a way, if you could just think about this, at the end of the day, it's just, for us, it's like a big interconnected plumbing or this network. But in the end, they're all connected. Again, just one requires a different type of access, but the reality is it is where things require some additional information. So why are we talking about dark web? Because you hear about it all the time. Oh, now, I know I keep going on. If you have any questions, please feel free to use the room chat, Q&A, and if you have any questions, please just go ahead and spout it out, and then I'll be more than happy to answer this in between or at the end as well. So I just want to make sure you all have that option. So why are we talking about dark net? Because for us, dark web is just a marketplace of many things. So I know there's been so many questions, and us as a company and as an individual researcher, we get a lot of these questions about where this information is and what it actually does. And for us, at the end of the day, it's a big marketplace of information or services. So you'll see stuff like people selling Bitcoin or exchanging Bitcoins. There's also hacking groups and services, and also fraud services for money laundering, what have you. But believe it or not, dark web is also uses a lot of research institutes actually use it for their archives and exchanging information as well. In addition, you hear, I guess these are the common things you hear about, like the drugs and criminal services. You got the illegal pornography, phishing scam, lots of interesting services. That's, more criminal behavior as well as terrorism. So in the end, it's a legitimate, it was actually created for a legitimate purpose, like privacy, but vast majority of it is actually used for illegal activities, unfortunately. But believe it or not, there are actually good and bad people inside the dark web itself. So we talked about the marketplace and some of the services that's being rendered inside the dark web. And then there are, the things that actually, the goods and services and exchange of that information. So what kind of information or services that get sold, such as stolen goods, narcotics. You hear about many cities, states, and internationally where narcotics are distributed or sold inside the dark web. Yes, they sell hacking services as well, where people engage an individual or group to conduct some services. But there are a lot of illegal medias, whether it's we won't get too much into it, but there is a lot of police and law enforcement in general really trying to stop a lot of the illegal pornographies and what have you. And then financial fraud. And believe it or not, so you hear like the public information or services for, let's say, Bitcoin exchanges where you buy and sell, but many of the criminals also like to really mix up their Bitcoin so that they don't get caught or engage a law firm or some foreign entity to launder money. So that all actually happens both privately and publicly. Obviously, in the dark web, it gets a little bit trickier. There's a lot of leaked data. You hear about your credit card informations. You hear about your passwords, your social media information. And you actually could engage legitimate criminals for illegal activities. And stolen data as well. It's very similar to leaked data, except the fact that many of the threat actors and the intelligence community, believe it or not, they actually first they steal the leaked data. We call it hack and leak operations. So you hear about a lot of ransomwares, but believe it or not, the ransomware also includes where they actually exfiltrate data from the affected target, and then if they don't pay the ransom, they actually leak the data because they didn't pay. So there is a lot of that actually happening as well. And then, of course, you hear about a lot of organization where they leak information about their company. And like literally, I could spend like a day going over this over and over about all the information that's been sold. But it's a big marketplace. Any question or comment? I love this. We got to do more of these virtual things. Okay. And why should it matter to you? So I think the problem is when you look at these three models, right, from a consumers to businesses, governments, especially with the businesses, whether you're small business, medium business, or large enterprises, all of this should matter, especially for the consumer side. It's really about your digital identity, and a lot of information that gets exfiltrated or stolen or harvested by bad people, and they actually use against you, whether it's against your children, your family, or your or your personal brand. And for businesses, obviously, it's really about the brand reputation, your products, your trade secret, communications, because anything that you do digitally can be exposed or available through whichever means, through the bad guys or misconfiguration. All of this information in the end will end up in the dark web or by these bad guys. And obviously for the government, we're talking about terrorism to misinformation, cyber warfare, but we're going to table the governments a little bit. But the reality for the consumers and everyone that's here, one of the key things I just want to make sure everybody understand is, dark web is, you hear about all these services, and, I will be the first one as a vendor to admit that, we don't cover everything, but we do see that both consumers and businesses, you have a exponential amount of digital information, which creates a digital risk. And there are many free and no cost or, right-sized solutions for you. But it's good for you to pay attention to what is your digital kind of spread across your assets. But I don't recommend you to actually go into it. But one of the key things I want you to remember is that as we get into the more digital age, digital transformation, a lot of your information is going to be available one time or another. So something to be really cognizant of. Which goes to, what you should do. Take an inventory of, this actually goes for both consumers and businesses and government, but government's like monolithic size, especially starting from the bottom. Everybody, we all have this humongous amount of data. Take an inventory to really understand what it's for and how you're actually accessing those. Because really you have to understand what your insight, meaning what am I using these for? Well, oftentimes people use so many different social media sites or so many of these job seeking sites or, these peer networking groups. And, when we actually even Google for, let's say, somebody's social media handle, you'll see tens and thousands of variations that people put together. And at the end, those can be used to kind of pivot and to target you. And really understand, for all your digital assets, do you really need it? And should you be sharing my information? I know there's a lot of conversation about privacy. And all of this relates to dark web because at the end, all of this information or identities or information about you, it becomes a value. It becomes a dollar value. There's a commercial value, and then there's the underworld value. You may not realize it, but you're selling your information or sharing information to commercial organization for ad networks, mobile telemetry. All this stuff happens legally, but believe it or not, that same information could be bought by the bad guys and use it to target you. And really the action is, it's decision time. You got to really decide whether or not you want to have all of this kind of footprint and breadcrumbs everywhere, whether or not you want to have that information readily available. Because, bringing it all together, it's what I said earlier. Dark web is connected globally. It's just a plumbing. For me, it's just a plumbing we call the internet, because at the end, that's how we all connect together. And then, it's I think of your identity as your postal code. So just be careful with your digital identity or digital assets, because at the end, it's that information that is actually in the dark web. And again, it doesn't matter if you're consumer, business, small or big, or government. We all have digital risk, and it's important for you to really understand what is covered. Now, what I would say is I know there may be questions about, should I go in there and should I check to see? Personally, professionally, you could always engage many of the companies just to ask them, like just to get a quick glimpse of where you're at. And those shouldn't cost you anything to do that because that's what these professionals and companies are designed to do that. So running a kind of quick check should there be no cost, but it's always good to check on your family and your businesses to understand whether or not you're impacted or not. With that said, again, thank you for kind of helping and allowing me to describe what dark web is for us, and hopefully it answers a lot of questions about what it is. And again, at the end of the day, you hear about deep dark, all these different variations. It's just internet, and it's just an additional access to get in, and that's really it. Where there's good and bad people, and there's a marketplace of things that you could buy and sell. So, with that said, again, thank you. So I'm going to open up for a Q&A session.
A few minutes for Q&A, and then we're going to move on to Jim Drever's presentation.
Don't everybody raise your hand now.
We're just so thorough. Okay, how can students be affected by the dark web?
Well, the student can't be affected by dark web. So we actually have, we as an organization, we actually do a lot of research. We actually give full grant access to our dark web collection. I think students in general have an exponential when it comes to the presence of their digital footprint. And we do see a lot of curiosity, whether it's students or academia, who's accessing for research purposes, and also for mostly research purpose and curiosity. And they may stumble upon it, and some of the buyers, let's say, of the marketplaces, very small percentage are, we do see that underage and as well as students. For us, one of the key thing I think as a parent and also faculty and academia is to really educate them and open to them about what dark web is, but not make it so magical that they're very curious about it. It is a place of good and bad, but really it's all about the education. David asked about I'm sorry. So Lawrence, I hope that answered your question. And you could always email me if you have any questions, as it relates to students, because we do work a lot with academia and educating them. So, more than happy to talk to your students and so forth. David asked, how do I know what's out there about me in the dark and deep web? Okay, so first and foremost, anybody that uses deep and dark web, it's the same thing. It's like it's an ocean of information. It's just in the deep end. But there are a lot of tools. There's, I would say, a lot of open source tools. I know we're going to have some other gentleman that's going to show you how to do that. But David, if you're actually wanting to just get a quick glimpse of, let's say, a company or businesses, feel free to reach out. I don't particularly recommend any tools because it's not a simple tool that could just go search for. As a company, we collect all of those artifacts and we store it into a ginormous data lake. So it's safe for us to collect that information. But if there are any specific questions, David, about getting a quick glimpse of where you're at, feel free to email me after this thing, and that'll be great. Jebediah, regarding defense against the dark web, do you recommend any specific? So the truth of the matter is, it's not really a defense against the dark web. So when you're talking about dark web, think of it like people spend and invest a lot of money on your castle, whether it's a wall, your firewalls, your watchtowers, you got your MSSP. You're doing all these monitoring and protection against some control or compliance or what have you. And the way I describe dark web monitoring or defense against it is that you need to make sure you have a vendor or provider is not just overlooking your walls on the top of your castle, but really actually use that provider has a very far reach outside of the state, country, and even region to have a good monitoring, because what you don't want to have is a noise of intelligence. What you want to have is a vendor that's going to give you the tailored intelligence specific to your industry or company. Once you have that information, the key thing you need to ask your vendor is, and the questions that we actually get from the board of directors from our client is our brand being targeted? Is our executives being targeted? Not about how secure your environment is. Those are the things that they want to know. They wanted preemptive information or real-time knowledge of an intelligence or information that's in the dark web for you to be preventive. There is no such thing as proactive per se, because that's not really possible. Intelligence providers are very reactive. There's communication, there's intelligence, and we have to assess it and then decide on it. So that's that. And then John, you said dark web is not indexed. Are forums the most accurate way to find dark web? No, forum is so forum has two things, right? Forum can be both in the dark web and the surface web. Forums have legitimately used for, let's say, sharing information. But I think there is a common thematic thing where people talk about dark web as, bad guys forum, because that's what the marketplace is. Well, that's kind of like the surface level of the dark web. I hate to say it. And then there are like the private chat. You got the human intelligence chain of assets where people are actually conversing, exchanging information. So unfortunately, we may believe that there is a lot of form, and form data are great, and those are usually text-based and what have you. But if you want to find information or marketplace about your data, and again, I think that's more for identifying a vendor that could do that. But if you're just looking for, let's say, just forum data, that's just one piece of it. There's companies, including ourselves, that monitor everything from chats to social media to forums to very specific groups for targeted individuals. So it varies. Does dark web monitoring just include static data monitoring, or does it include communication status? So the short answer is it's both. If you're buying a service, for most part, you got the static data or historical data of, let's say, dark web, whether it's forum or communications or chats. But the reality is that there are going to be mediums like Telegram, WhatsApp, or QQ, and all those different mediums where you have to be invited or know somebody so that you could actually passively monitor to do those things. Now, the reality is that intelligence providers, we use monikers, we use personas to actually embed ourselves into these groups or forums, or gain access to these forums through invitations, through reputation, and we converse with them. And that's just the real truth and the fact. So it's all of those. So you should. Now, if you are thinking more like, well, it's social media and all this chatter and communication, there's no company that's going to have the entire scope. I know a lot of companies do have a very large open source intelligence that includes a lot of the social media collaboration and platforms. The problem is that, the coverage and the people change all the time. So you have to really understand what your scope is. But there's no company, including ourselves, that's going to say, hey, we have 100% coverage of, let's say, communication chatter. If we do, let's say, 23% to 27% coverage of global, of the bad guys, that's pretty good. And nobody has 80% or 100%. Now, we could have said we collected all this indexed information, but to have a real-time monitoring and to cover all of those areas, both using technology, human intelligence, it would just take an army to do that kind of stuff. I'm the time cop. Yep, there you go. Never mind. Thank you, Laura. Any questions or comments, please feel free to email, comment, and so forth. But thank you all.
All right. Next, we have Jim Drever, and I'm going to pull him up live. Let's see. Lindsay, can you help me get him on? He's on as an attendee. There we are.
Yep, I'm here.
All right, Jim, did you want us to introduce your video, or did you want to go live?
Just play it. I'll be here for questions, what have you. But
All
yeah,
right.
I need to hack my accounts apparently.
Awesome. All right. Here's Jim's video. Thank you.
By the Small Business Administration and the Wyoming Business Council, administered through the University of Wyoming to provide free business advising on a variety of topics. One of those topics happens to be cybersecurity, and we provide assistance with that across the state. I'm a certified ethical hacker, and today we are going to talk about Shodan. What is Shodan? Shodan is a search engine, sometimes known as the hacker search engine, that looks through the Internet of Things online. It rolls through every IP address every month, and it sends what's called a banner grab to go find out what device is connected and a whole bunch of other information. It just nicely says, hey, what are you doing? Here we are on the Shodan website. The trick on finding your way around, if you're brand new to Shodan, I wouldn't start searching. Go under View All, and you'll find the Help Center. And here you can learn more about Shodan. It has a database of in 2013, it reached over 1 billion different devices. Here it will show you basically how to do some of the searches and shows examples of banner grabs, which we'll see some of those here shortly. And you can do all sorts of kind of searches for all things that you're looking for. How this can be used from a defensive standpoint is, especially if you have a fixed IP address, you can search on that IP address and look at your business or your organization's digital footprint out there. You might find some things are showing up that you don't want to show up. Another great way to use it is if you have just configured your firewall and you want to check it out, there is a service for doing that. Shodan is paid for by a subscription method, but if you have a .edu email account, so you're part of a university or college, you can get limited access for free. But my advice for everyone here is watch out in November for Cyber Monday deals. I got a lifetime membership for about the price of a Happy Meal. Totally worth it. And here it shows pricing. So there's two ways you can explore on Shodan in my mind. One is if you know exactly what you're looking for or thereabouts. If you're looking for a specific type of device, for example, you can type that in and see what comes up. And there we have a list of 109,403 likely Netgear devices. On each one of these, you can click on them and see if you can learn anything more about them. Sometimes when you're looking around, you'll find on the left side here where it's open, you'll find vulnerabilities that show up with the Meter's vulnerability database. It'll tell you what ports are open, gives you public keys, basic sort of information that you would expect to get when querying a device. You can also sort by country. So let's step back here. And the country's based on IP addresses. Of course, you could mask yours if you're clever enough with a VPN, but so here we can click on the United States, and it will give us a list of what it thinks are Netgear devices in the United States. So for 41,488, I'm sure there's a lot more out there, but these are the ones that it's finding underneath the search term Netgear. The other way I like looking at this is through exploring. So one way we can do exploring is looking through here. We can look at video games and let's see, explore Minecraft servers. And here we can learn about the different Minecraft servers. 1,500 158,523, excuse me. And again, just the other way that you saw early on, let me get back to the homepage more. And again, I'm going to go to View All, and we can look at images. And so this is screenshots. So this is it when it goes to a VPN, remote desktop, or the other one that's interesting is webcams. A lot of webcams share a screenshot that you can look at. So here we're looking at all these different people's desktops that we could log into or try and log into, see if they have weak passwords or that sort of thing. So if you have a computer that's set up like this, you need to make sure that you have strong passwords. You need to protect it. But one port that's fun is the port 554, and that's used by Real Streaming, which a lot of web cameras use. And so from here, we can see the screen grabs from people's web cameras. Shodan's famous because you can search webcams even without having the screen grab in front of you. You can look for ones with password admin, or username admin, password 1234. So I'm just going to scroll through here to give you an idea of what people leave online that we can just sort of look at. You can look by country again and other things. Some of it's rather a shame that they're out there. There's a lot of private web cameras. Some that are troubling are ones in stores where they overlook the counter, where credit cards would be visible, things like that. These are some of the issues that we've ran into in the cybersecurity world over the years, is people using default passwords or not password protecting. In this case, it's just screen grabs, which is a slightly different animal, but this gives you an idea of what's out there. Back in Shodan, I'm going to do just a search on VPNs. And what we're looking for here that's worrying is ones that are not encrypted. There's no authentication. Anyone can hop on. By the way, came up with 4.2 million of these. So this is rather alarming. We could scroll through all these. Another thing I'd like to show you under the Explorer function, you can do industrial control systems. That's interesting if that's your focus in cybersecurity. We looked at video games, databases. Also, this is an interesting feature here, is it has top voted searches, and you can look at more popular searches, and then you can look at recently shared searches that people want, that think that's interesting. On databases, another feature of Shodan that was very popular, we saw over the last few years, people would talk about finding breaches with 270 million lines of customer information or this, that. It seemed every day that we would hear something. A lot of that was people on Shodan playing around with looking at Mongo databases and Elastic ones that weren't protected. Since then, thousands of these databases have been removed. I don't know if it's been people vigilante acts or if it's been self-done or what's going on exactly, but there's still a lot out there. So here, for example, you can see it's been compromised. It has these nice little tags, but we can still see, get an idea of what's out there. Here's one that hasn't been compromised, but it's also protected, which is good. If they have the authentication, it doesn't show up with the number of gigabytes or bytes or what have you. Anyway, that's in a nutshell Shodan. There's a long ways to go with this as far as exploring. It's pretty neat. It's helpful to use as a defensive tool. It's also helpful if you're looking for a penetration testing tool. It complements other tools such as Nmap very well. If you have questions, yeah, I'd be happy to help.
For the sake of time, I'd like to introduce Matt Smith from Alliance Communications Tech. And Matt, I'm going to go ahead and make you big. And he's going to talk about a related topic, and then we're going to take questions for both Matt and Jim at the end of his session, and then we'll move on to Marjorie. So Matt, take it away.
Hi, my name is Matthew Smith. I'm the managing partner of Alliance Communications. We focus on security, surveillance, access control. One of the most interesting things we do is the IP camera with video monitoring software included. In order to talk about the future of surveillance and where we're going, I kind of need to talk about where we came from. Most everyone knows that cameras started off as analog. They started off with the coax. It was very limited what you could do. Most of them were recorded by VCRs. They eventually moved to DVDs. But once we created the IP camera,
Matt froze. Hopefully we'll get him back.
Going here. I'm going to keep going.
Okay, you're back.
So the camera manufacturer, Axis, was one of the very first ones to create the IP camera. When they created the IP camera, it allowed us to hook computers basically to cameras. That allowed us for video monitoring software, that allowed us for analytics, that allowed us to take our surveillance networks much further, allowed us to view them differently. It allowed larger global, well, citywide surveillance areas. I'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit. After the birth of the IP camera, the video monitoring software soon followed. There's so much more that can be achieved now with surveillance. The analytics such as license plate recognition that everybody has seen, facial recognition that we've seen a lot of. One that we don't hear a lot of is emotional biometrics. We're seeing video monitoring softwares that have the ability to establish a baseline on a individual and can detect if this person's emotional levels are increasing. It's kind of frightening. A lot of places are using it for threat detection before it happens. We've seen a lot of them in prisons. There's a lot of suicide detection, stuff like that. And the amount of software that goes into this is incredible. We're going to see more of a citywide surveillance is what I truly believe. I believe that we're going to start seeing video monitoring softwares that communicate on a level that we see with the IP industry. Cameras now, almost all cameras, not every single one, but most cameras now operate on a platform called OnVIF. OnVIF allows for one IP camera to speak with another IP camera on the same video monitoring software. So customers or end users are no longer having to spend thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars on one particular camera with analytics installed. They can buy a mid-level camera and they can put a heavy video monitoring software behind it. This video monitoring software allows and decodes all that information. One of the biggest hurdles of the IP camera was the bog on networks that we would see. Most IT departments hate surveillance networks. They are very traffic heavy. There's a lot of throughput going through there. With certain companies such as Axis, they are working heavily on creating a very, very low throughput on their cameras. We have seen some incidences where schools can have 60 to 70 cameras and they're seeing less than a gig going across their network. I truly feel like that is going to be one of the biggest steps moving forward, is when we can have large camera networks on one single server, one single basically backbone of communication. But if I'm to piggyback onto what James was talking about with being able to look into other people's cameras, one of the biggest things we're seeing is people don't even change their passwords on cameras. We are we are a security company, and we try to tell people to. There's, I think every IT guy was going to agree with me here. We can only do so much. The end user has to participate a little bit in their own security. The user themselves has to track their passwords. They have to make sure who has access to it. And that is one of our biggest security flaws that we're seeing, is that there is really no buy-in on the end user. They feel as though that they're invulnerable and nothing will ever happen to them. We saw from Jim's presentation that that's not the case, that you can get into cameras very easily. And then going back to Gene's presentation, if you're not doing your due diligence on any type of security, you are very vulnerable. And guys leading up to me have been talking about more of the back end. I'm talking about the actual physical security of it, but it does relate to each other. You have to take an active role in your own security. Do you have any questions for Jim and I?
Question that came up on the chat regarding pen testing. This was for Jim. Can Shodan be used to scan the inside of a network or just the public side?
Yeah, I just posted in the chat an answer on that. It's what's facing the public world. So if you have a poorly configured firewall, you can hop on and play around. But if you've got it locked down pretty well, generally you're safe. One of the things in there too, just again, for most Wyoming people, two things in your favor is unless you have a permanent IP address, it changes every time you restart your router. Randomly, they farm out a new IP address to you, so it helps protect you through being anonymous in that direction. And then also the locations are off because we don't. I show up in Laramie as being in Rock Springs a lot of times with my IP address.
I have a question. So this emotional surveillance or the emotional biometrics, can you talk about that a little bit more? Where is that being used besides, suicide prevention?
We're seeing a lot of the emotional biometrics in places where they don't talk about having it. Prisons are definitely one. I can tell you there are some schools, none in Wyoming that I know of, are using this. But it is that basically it's being used as a weapons detection in the most broad of sense. It's trying to establish a baseline of normalcy and then building off that. I gotta say, it's actually scary accurate. I am concerned about some of the levels at which we are taking surveillance. There are some areas that I do want to see people be more aware of. The facial recognition stuff, I can tell you, has been used for the last decade in almost every major retailer. It's not being used for theft detection and stuff and shrinkage. It's mostly being used to track a store's performance with a certain demographic, such as a Starbucks, and I can't say that Starbucks is or isn't using facial recognition, but it takes a lot of the guesswork out of opening a new branch or a new franchise. They can see that we have a medium income of this, we have the average demographic of this. Our success rate in these areas is going to be proven based off the surveillance that's already in place. Going back into the emotional biometrics, it is fairly new, but it is rather accurate. Going to your question about where I've seen a lot of it, most of it has been prisons, and there has been some government reception areas that I've seen it in. Any brands or companies for emotional biometrics I see there. One of the questions, yes, we use a video surveillance system called DigiFort. They are one of the largest video monitoring softwares in the world. They recently came to the United States. I've been luckily one of the very first few to use them in the United States. They have a tiered system that you have your basic, you have your more advanced, then you have your license plate recognition, your facial, and your emotional, stuff like that. But if there is one video monitoring software that I were to recommend that anybody looks at, it would definitely be DigiFort. I think they are a phenomenal, cutting-edge video monitoring software.
Question in the chat that kind of got lost in some of the discussion. Where do camera vulnerabilities rank in ways to illegally access an online location?
Where do camera vulnerabilities rank in ways to illegally access an online location? That's a good question. I'm actually going to be pulling in on my panel with that one. Where it ranks, if it's the most vulnerable or least vulnerable, I don't know, but I can tell you that going back to some of my conversation about people just not even changing the default password is probably one of the biggest things. I would say probably 30 to 40% of people we come across haven't even changed the default passwords. And those can all be found online easily. If it's the most vulnerable, I don't know. I think it all comes down to professionals and who you choose to protect you and your business.
I'll also chime in. If you found a camera and the IP address, if it's version 6, you can track down to individual neighborhoods. So yeah, that, if you're worried about privacy, that sort of thing, it could be a vulnerability. As well as, looking in the background. One of the things that I found interesting is watching the Zoom meetings, people wearing glasses, what you can see on their computer screens from the glare. It's kind of fun.
Absolutely. And when all this COVID stuff first happened, Zoom was one of the most vulnerable of software. It's not software. They're one of the most vulnerable places out there for that go-to meeting kind of thing. And they have made strides in increasing their security.
True.
It's kind of $1 million idea. What glasses? If there's a glare. Some sort of glare protection you could put on your glasses so that people can't see whatever's on your desk, which mine is so messy nobody'd be able to find it anyway.
I think James' comment, I bet casinos love surveillance monitoring. That is actually one place where the emotional biometrics were actually created. They first started with the people winning jackpots. They are able to see, and this surveillance software is able to actually detect if somebody is actually genuinely surprised or faking it. And that's when we really started seeing the first emotional biometrics coming out. The software takes frame by frame by frame and will actually take most of it is the emotional stuff in the eyes, and it's actually sensing if you are faking the machine, we're actually truly surprised to be winning. Can emotional biometrics be used to cheat? You better have one hell of a poker face.
All right, so that's the last question. I'm going to go ahead and start, Marjorie. Jim and Matt, if you guys would stick around for the break, just in case other people have questions. I know Jean's going to as well. That would be great. Marjorie, I'm going to go ahead and start your video, and then you can talk about the computer science department.
My name is Marjorie Anderson, and I am the Cybersecurity and Information Systems Department Chair here at Casper College. I'm standing next to one of the 5 workstations that we have in our Cyber Lab. This is a closed lab that has been isolated from the rest of the Casper College network because it will allow our students to work with sensitive, dangerous, and even problematic kinds of projects inside this lab. We have 5 workstations that can accommodate 2 to 3 students at a time, and the instructor can see every single workstation when they're in here. The lab itself also requires keycard access, so we can monitor who's coming in and out and using the lab. So what's the purpose of it? The first thing that we're going to be able to do is our instructors will be able to create dark web types of projects. That's why it has to be isolated. Students will be able to learn how to work with the dark web. They'll be able to learn how to do things like forensics projects, tracking, and hacking from an ethical standpoint inside of the dark web. We're also moving forward with a collaboration with Laredo College down in Texas. Laredo has a massive dark web lab that our students will be able to safely access from inside of this lab underneath instructors' security and oversight. We're hoping to be able to develop some continuing education programs that students from the community or from law enforcement can also come and take. That would take the form of students coming in with workshops, small courses, and various kinds of things that they can do, again, in a closed, safe environment. And finally, we're hoping to expand the hands-on things that students can do. A lab this small will give us access to very expensive software, because we would only have to apply the software to 5 individual workstations. We can afford to have our students have access to things that they otherwise would not be able to. Can you hear me? So that's just a brief overview of the Cyber Lab. And the Cyber Lab is actually part of the cybersecurity program. And at Casper College, it's underneath the School of Business because it's a CTE program, Career and Technical Education. The computer science program is underneath the School of Science, and Charlotte Gruner oversees that. Laura has posted some informational videos out on YouTube and the website, so you can learn more about that program. And finally, one of my colleagues in electronics, Megan Graham, oversees the electronics department, is putting together a certificate in IT. So what we've got is sort of this wonderful cross-college collaboration where we're trying to make sure that students have the stackable skills, exposure to different things, and are able to go into the tech fields that are the best fit for them. So are there any questions about what we're doing here at Casper College?
You mentioned law enforcement. Can you talk about your vision for that?
So I've worked a little bit with the Casper PD sergeants. I do some hands-on Excel training. And what we're hoping to be able to do with law enforcement is have people that are doing cyber forensics or who are working in kinds of adjacent fields come in and be able to get hands-on training in the cyber lab in small ways. Ideally, we could run that through our continuing education department because then it would be open to anybody in the community. So that's my hope.
Question from Tyler, is the lab accessible to the public or only enrolled students?
That would depend on how we get it up and rolling. If we made it accessible to the public, it would still have to be underneath the Casper College facilities, scheduling and things. So my hope would be that we would be able to do something where we could make it available to external people, but we're not there yet.
Courses that you intend to teach the students with this, and what careers do you expect them to go into with it?
So most of our cyber graduates are going into more traditional IT fields to start. So they're going into networking, they're moving into network administrator. But we also have students who are looking at data. So they're going to be the people that are managing the databases, securing the actual data, handling the analytics. And we already have the program in place, so this is just an add-on to what we're already doing. And we are also hoping that our students can get into some of the remote work and telecommuting opportunities that are out there. So if they want to stay in the state but work for a bigger company elsewhere, they can. And of course, in order to do that, they have to be able to secure their own personal systems as well as understand the systems they're working inside of.
That's great. Thank you, Marjorie, for sharing that with us. Why don't we have all of our panelists come back on live, and we will open it up for questions to all the panelists. I'm gonna make you the Brady Bunch. Oh, sorry. There we are. So what questions do you have for Jean, Matt, Jim, or James, and Marjorie?
I like that the default picture it has for me looks like a farm field.
It does, doesn't it?
That's cool.
So, Jim, as an ethical hacker, how would you use the Casper College Lab if you had access?
That's a good question. Yeah, I mean, my experience with the dark web, there's a really good equivalent of Have I Been Owned website that you can go to and find. So when somebody says, see if you can get into my system, I go to that website because it's called everybody's, it's a little dated, but it's got their email addresses with plain text passwords. That's what I use the dark web the most for, is that in sort of poking around here and there. But most of the dark web to me is, pretty yucky in my experience. So I wouldn't use it that much unless I was a lot more advanced and I needed to find different tools, viruses that I could use to break into something. But yeah, at this point in my life, no, I'm not there yet.
So we have a question: how early in computer science education should the dark web and these related topics start being addressed? Is it just a computer science topic, or is it more?
Well, we start early on the cyber side, and I can't speak for anybody else, but I actually start talking about the dark web lab in my general computer science class. It's an overview class, very easy for a beginner, because people need to know it's out there. They need to know it exists. So we don't talk about this is how you access it, but we do talk about it. I like to talk about the difference between the dark web and the invisible web, the parts of the web that are private and secure, not visible to the browsers, but aren't bad.
Yeah, and one of the trends that we're seeing is we actually partners with a university out in the East Coast. I'm also a research associate for UNLV for computer sciences over science and engineering. What we find that, especially on the dark web side, is that we actually work with a lot of universities. And for the computer students in general, we ask them to look at data science. So we actually provide all of our entire data set for the universities that is partnered with us to actually go through and actually mine data from all the information that we collected, for natural language processing to jargonism. So I think from a student perspective, don't think out of the topic, but the data that's contained in it and what you could do with it. So that's really the key. I mean, it goes the same thing with a lot of the IoTs in general. When you're talking about not only dark web, but what is publicly available, the science behind it is really around, like, what is the critical infrastructure that it's actually, just like for us, the biggest thing that in the IoT world is really the ICS controls, because, whether it's utility, now they have power to stop things, whether it's your thermostat or your electricity. So I think from a student perspective, these are all engineering tasks and also science tasks and learning with the data. So I think, that's the core of what computer science is, right? So just to think about.
Matt, there was a question in the chat that you wanted to answer, and then that, I think that'll have to be the last one because we'll need to go to break.
Okay, the question is, Matt, do you see emotional cameras ever entering the healthcare space in hospitals? I feel that's a very difficult question to answer. I feel a lot of that's going to have to do with our current legislation. There is constant new legislation out there, such as the new Earn It Act, stuff like that. Really, a lot of it's going to have to come down to individual states. I can tell you right now that most states don't have a lot of laws regarding surveillance. Wyoming, in fact, is a one-party state where you can actually record every single one of your conversations and never have to tell anybody about it. We are moving to a world of less privacy. I truly believe that one day we are going to see the video monitoring softwares work together in a conglomerate that will allow law enforcement to basically put one person's information into a system, and it will look through all of these systems, finding this person. Privacy laws are in definite need of some serious legislation. I can tell you that. But yeah, I do foresee emotional biometrics, facial recognition, license plate recognition, all of this stuff basically being common day use in the next decade. Wouldn't security cameras still be protected under HIPAA compliance standards? Yeah, but it's a controlled network. What they do is up to them. A lot of schools have, almost every school has surveillance inside of it with the kids obviously on surveillance. It's how it exits the school is the problem.
As it relates to HIPAA and cameras, so I used to work with JACO and what have you. So for the hospitals, capturing the data for physical monitoring is not a HIPAA violation. HIPAA as a whole, if they're collecting that information for physical security for the purpose of protecting the hospital, it is still not a HIPAA violation. Privacy, but the privacy rule is a little different in the sense of your medical attributes. So, you know, don't. I know there's a mix of things that happen with compliance and regulation versus what is required. And you know, again, it's just information for most people. But anyways.
Absolutely, Gene. I completely agree with you. And I see cameras being used more for diagnosing, for monitoring, and stuff like that. So I don't want to sound doom and gloom for everybody, because there are some pretty amazing things that these cameras are doing, and they are truly saving lives at the same time.
Absolutely.
That's exciting news. Thank you all of our panelists for this really informative session and for being here today. We really appreciate it to share this wide variety of knowledge with us today. Our next session starts at 10, so you've got a 5-minute break, everybody. Thank you so much for coming, and we appreciate it.